Andrew Bashago.
Yes. Hi, Daniel.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Wonderful.
Excellent. Very good. Excellent. I don't
know. About 15 years ago, I began examining the facts surrounding a very unusual set of experiences I had in childhood where I was brought in to a secret defense project under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It related to work that my late father, Raymond Bashago, had done at the Edison Labs in the late 50s and early 60s, where he essentially recapitulated Nikola Tesla's teleportation technologies. And I first teleported between New Jersey and New Mexico with my dad at age 6 in September of 1968. So I spent a good 5 years investigating my memories because, as an attorney, we're ethically obligated, in fact, to police our own psychiatric condition. And what I was remembering, which were a set of highly unusual experiences I had that seemed to indicate that I had been brought into the advent of time travel by the Defense Department of our country, required some investigation. So I began calling people that I remembered were on the project. I used the internet to find people. I ended up doing 3 major fact-finding trips in 2003, 4, and 8 to New Mexico, where I not only verified that the project existed, but I even recovered confirming data that I had written down regarding different aspects of the cultural history of Santa Fe, of Albuquerque, and I mean in terms of as my father and I experienced it. So I compiled a lot of data by around 2004, and I began giving public talks about my experiences, and that led to invitations to do radio shows and then ultimately TV shows. So I've done about 10 television shows and probably over 100 radio shows about my personal experiences participating in the advent of time travel at the time of the emergence in time travel in the United States defense technical community. Essentially, the significance of my truth campaign regarding time travel is that time travel emerged in 1970 when DARPA found a way to adjust a teleportation device that Nikola Tesla had left in his paperwork upon his death in January of 1943, so that where initially we were doing in 68, 69, and so forth, we were just teleporting in real time. By 1970, we noticed when we would come back from New Mexico that if it had been, let's say, night had already fallen in New Mexico, when we were back in New Jersey, it was let's say 11 o'clock of the afternoon of the same day. And so we asked some of the technicians at Curtis Wright, in Woodridge, New Jersey, where the teleport in New Jersey was located, are you setting us back in time? And they said yes. They rather sheepishly admitted that they were. And we asked, how long, how far back in time can you put us? And they said, right now, 12 hours. So as I began to piece together my memories, which I really spent, years on, and then began lecturing on, I realized that I had been part of something very significant, essentially the emergence of time travel in the U.S. defense technical community. So I've now defended that very controversial truth ever since. And when I was beginning to do leading radio programs, I was contacted by a set of people who were not from my childhood experiences in DARPA's Project Pegasus time traveling, but they began to remind me of a set of memories that had actually been blocked, which was that during my college years at UCLA, I was going over to a Hughes aircraft facility in El Segundo, California, and making jumps to Mars or some planetary environment that, at least initially, the program sponsors had believed was the planet Mars. And working with those witnesses that now number 3, William Stillings, Bernard Mendez, and now William Whitecrow, I was able to bring forward the hidden history of what we're still referring to as the Mars Jump Room program. When there's a bit of a split of opinion as to whether it was the actual Mars or not among those of us who were in the program. So the thrust of my truth campaign has been to inform the American people about two advanced defense technical projects that I can't really say that utilize their tax dollars, because in fact these black projects are usually financed by the corporate sector, by the private sector, so they can evade congressional oversight. For example, DARPA's Project Pegasus, in which time travel was developed, was being funded secretly by the Colgate-Palmolive people, the people who bring us, dish detergent and toothpaste. In fact, Sterling Colgate, one of the scions of that vast family fortune, was one of the time travel physicists that I interacted with extensively on the project. But I've been informing the American people of the fact that our great American civilization, a civilization that I still regard as great — I don't think we need to become great again. I think we've got problems that we have to correct, but we're still a great country, the greatest country in the history of civilization, is my understanding of our country. So I brought that information forward just so that the American people would know that we did this, that this was one of the great technical feats of the 20th century, and that particularly the Tesla teleportation technology will be something that we will need to implement socially to avoid catastrophe in terms of designing our civic infrastructure in the 21st century. And then that led to a personal decision, really going back to around 2011, to run for president so that I could call for what I believe we should now do, which is implement this technology to eliminate the forms of transport that put 60% of the human contribution to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. In other words, we could achieve a 60% reduction in greenhouse gases if we were to get rid of planes, trains, and automobiles and motorcycles and implement Tesla teleportation. And that's something that the Al Gores of the political sphere never really talk about. They talk about emissions trading and sort of want to just manage the problem. I believe that we should implement the secret technology that our father and grandfather's generation developed to literally lead the world again in applied science. So I made a personal decision to run for president with that my leading proposal, but I've also drafted 100 proposals in the area of truth, reform, and innovation, because I didn't want to be typecast, as the time travel candidate for president. I've really been, representing myself to the American people as what I am, which is the truth candidate for president. I'm a leading figure in the truth movement, and the information I'm sharing with the public is true. So I've continued that truth campaign now as a presidential candidate.
Now, the time travel and the teleportation, you do not feel, I know you don't want to be pigeonholed into those as that category, as the representative of those truths. So how are you separating yourself from those? Or do you just kind of
Well, no, I'm not distancing myself from the fact that I've now alleged since I first spoke publicly in October of 2004. So I'm now 12 years into my truth campaign. I mean, I've done major media around this, so I'm in no way ashamed of what I did for the country. I mean, I served my country at the risk of life and limb. I'm telling the truth. My father's work as a career employee of the Ralph M. Parsons Company can easily be established. There's all kinds of historical proofs that I've accomplished. I've shared hundreds of discrete facts about my experiences that under the laws of evidence come in as direct evidence. Mm-hmm. And I've brought forward photographic evidence of my time travel experiences and also other participants. I have 3 as to the Mars claims, and one of those claimants who I met up on Mars during my college years had actually been my instructor in martial arts in 1971-72 when I was a kid on Project Pegasus. And that's William Whitecrow. He came forward last month, and I'm soon going to be bringing forward Mark DePrimo, one of the individuals I grew up with in New Jersey, went to school with, indeed went to church with, who is going to testify publicly about the fact that he was one of my fellow teleportees. So I'm proud of what I did for the country. I think what we did was very significant, and I'm not separating myself from that at all. What I mean simply is that as a candidate for president, I felt that it was my duty to give the country a platform, not just a single issue upon which I was running. In other words, I felt a moral obligation and a patriotic duty to provide the country with 100 initiatives, not just a single issue initiative surrounding teleportation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did catch that about your comment about America is already great, so I can understand the candidate you alluded to there. Regarding the other major candidate, why would we say want to vote for you, say, versus that candidate?
Well, I'm a known entity. I mean, I'm a figure in the truth movement. I've been very forward with who I am, what my background involves, what I've accomplished in my career, what my ideas are. I would say that I'm a superior alternative to Clinton and Trump. And I think we really have to avoid the duality of playing either of those cards because, look, they're both unacceptable candidates. Let's start with Mrs. Clinton. Since leaving the presidency, which was, I understand it was a co-presidency, Bill and Hillary Clinton have essentially taken a dive bomb into the moral sewer. They basically became very successful international scavenger capitalists, even ripping off aid programs. I mean, if for example, we are to look at a documentary like Clinton Cash, we see the true behavior of the Clintons in terms of even ripping off entire countries in need. I mean, they were working some of their relatives into the aid funding in Haiti, for example. Okay, and let me also add this. Donald Trump is not the wealthiest person in this race. The Clintons are. The Clinton Foundation has accumulated $100 billion since they left the White House, and basically taking money from corrupt countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel. Do you know the Saudis have been buying our kidnapped children since the 1950s? What is any American politician doing taking money from them? What are we doing calling the Saudis our allies? I mean, Israel may have perpetrated 9/11. Why are we viewing them as our allies? And why have the Clintons accepted tens of millions of dollars from such corrupt countries? Now, so I think that the Clintons, particularly Mrs. Clinton, but that is to say, she's the candidate, the Clintons are ethically incompetent to return to the White House. They've demonstrated that by becoming basically international criminals. I mean, if they were criminals before, if they were running drugs through the Mena airstrip on the Iran-Contra resupply network and killing their political foes, as there's now substantial evidence that they've actually retained some group to basically be perpetrating assassinations to advance their political careers. We've now seen this 20-year history of them basically ripping off international aid programs, accepting blood money from evil regimes, and that makes both of them simply ethically unfit to be either president or first gentleman, as Bill Clinton would purport to ultimately become. Now, as to Mr. Trump, as I stated on Coast to Coast AM when I declared my own candidacy on December 19th of 2015, you got to give the man his props. He's a remarkable American. What I know through one of my law clients who was a wealthy real estate investor is that Donald Trump apparently only sleeps 4 hours a night. I mean, he's a hard worker. But my problem with Donald Trump is not that he's ethically incompetent to be president. He is essentially emotionally incompetent to be president. I'll give you one example, and it's in the small details that we see people's character. I have never witnessed anything as mean-spirited as him making fun of that reporter for the New York Times who has suffered the misfortune of having been born with a disabled arm, with a deformed arm. That was not just juvenile, it was mean-spirited and ugly. And I believe that, from my reckoning, it disqualifies Mr. Trump from being president and hence representative of our country. We're not a mean-spirited people. We're a good people. We're a generous. I think we just have to essentially go to what RFK said right there in his last speech before he was assassinated. I tend to misquote this, but he said something along the lines, we're a generous people, a selfless people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very true. In other words, in my life are hundreds of people more ethically qualified than the Clintons and more personally qualified or emotionally qualified than Mr. Trump to be president of this country. And I believe I am as well. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to give any of your listeners the idea that I'm running to help or hinder either candidate. I'm running on my own merits. I've been very truthful with American people, and I plan to govern as the truth president, whether I win this time around, which, having lost the California primary, does not seem likely. But certainly I'm going to continue to run in 2020 and 2024 because I think the American people deserve a presidency and a president that is as truthful, as just, and as creative as they are. And I think that, look, we do remarkable things in the area of business and for example, business and applied science. Why aren't we doing remarkable things in government? We're not. I saw this political campaign, this presidential campaign, as an insider to the extent that I was running myself. I generated an extensive platform to give the American people a view of how I would govern and what my goals would be. And I've really been astonished at how shallow this presidential election has been. There seemingly has been, by my reckoning, there's been almost really no profound discussion of the problems and challenges that confront our country. And it took running for me to really see that. Essentially, the mainstream media only focused on a set of insider beltway candidates. They were the ones who were talked about by Fox, CNN, and NBC, which rule the television airwaves. They were the ones invited into the debates. And then several multimillionaire business people, Trump and Fiorina, were as well. And then there were a handful of Democrats running as well, Hillary and a few others. There was very little coverage, in this country at least, of the 1,500 other Americans who were running. Now, to their credit, I was interviewed by the BBC, but I've been a legitimate candidate, and I just want to make it clear that I've been talking about running in 2016 since 2011, long before Clinton and Trump were declared candidates, and I'm not some kind of spoiler. And in fact, for those who believe that I'm going to take votes away from Mr. Trump, I would urge those people to revisit my 100 proposals, which are at andy2016.com/proposals, because I'm just as likely in the blue states to take votes away from Mrs. Clinton, because I've been running a campaign that essentially satisfies what Ralph Nader is calling the convergence which is going on in our country, which is not a matter of being liberal or conservative. It's a matter of perceiving yourself as either an insider or, for the vast majority of us now, as outsiders in our own form of government.
Wasn't that also noted in the fact presently there are a number of high-profile Republicans that are going to vote for Hillary Clinton, in that the fact of the matter is they are protecting their own interests, their own little kingdom. Isn't that really, at least could we give Trump credit for smoking them out in that end of it, that they never were with the people, which is exactly why Trump rose to where he is, because the people said, and possibly through the uses of the internet and social media, they've discovered the house of cards that our political system has been for at least 3 or 4 decades.
Yes, I think that Trump is a legitimate outsider. I see in him and his campaign something I've tried to do, which is tell it like it is. And I think there's been great appeal to that. And I think that he does stand in opposition to the New World Order. I think his patriotism and his focus on this country and its right to protect its own borders from invasion, to pursue tax policies and trade policies that will create jobs in America rather than see us lose them. When you're living in a country where on the IC's, on the Immigration Authority's own website, there's advice to illegal aliens how to avoid detection and arrest, something is profoundly wrong in terms of the way the government is operating against the interests of the American people. Yeah. So the basic thrust of Mr. Trump's campaign, I think, is authentic, and I think that he is now being vilified in the mainstream media because he does stand in legitimate opposition to the New World Order, and let's face it, the wholesale screwing of the American people. So, yes, I recognize that, and the point I was distinguishing is I'm not sure that he has the temperament, let's say the emotional maturity to operate successfully as president. But I certainly think he's earned his props as a foe of the New World Order and a legitimately independent candidate who has utilized his own great wealth to run an independent campaign. And that's why I think he received so much opposition when he was, leading up to his nomination by the Republican Party, and why we're hearing so much reporting now about how in some states Republicans may be even crossing the aisle to vote for Mrs. Clinton.
But as far as the temperament or experience or lack thereof, in either case, hasn't Obama set that bar pretty low? I mean, here's a man who rose to 2 full terms on the experience of being a community organizer. Now, I guess one could say, look what that has gotten us too. What a community organizer has gotten us. On my Facebook, Andy, I don't know if you saw it. I put a meme up there, and it had a pallet full of $400 million, and it was Obama somehow found that laying around somewhere. Nobody knows where he keeps that stash, but so he hides the fact that he paid that ransom to the Iranians for 7 months, and then he says to Trump, "You're not qualified." Well, maybe I'd rather have somebody with, I didn't know you were running for one. I was a little bit on the back end of that, but when I found out about it, I wanted to have you on the program. But is it when he says you're not fit to run, when he's shipping $400 million of physical cash to a known terrorist enemy state dedicated to the destruction of America? I don't know if that's the kind of experience we need.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree. And let me explain something that you also may not know, and that is that Barack Obama, then using the name Barry Soetoro, at the time that he had attended 1 year at Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California, was in my Mars jump room training class at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, in summer of 1980. I roomed with him for several days before I received my own dorm room there. Well, actually, we had an argument about affirmative action. He was arguing on behalf of it. I was arguing against it from the perspective that the black community would be benefited in a more organic sense, more widely, by things like community development block grants for predominantly African-American inner-city neighborhoods. So he was taking the elitist position that he was benefiting from. And Barack, as he's now known, Barack Obama, served with us. I was sometimes at the El Segundo jump room facility with him. I was sometimes in the jump room, and we did a number of jumps together in the 40 or so jumps that I did. I don't have the exact count of how many jumps I did, but he was a participant in the project. So when I revealed that in an appearance with my fellow jumper William Stillings and Laura Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of President Dwight David Eisenhower, who was testifying about the fact that she was describing how in 2006 and 2007 she was subjected to a recruitment effort to get her to relocate to the U.S. colony on Mars. A couple weeks later, President Obama planted a phony story in Wired.com. That's Wired Magazine Online. It was planted there by the spokesperson for the National Security Council, Tommy Vietor, who had been Obama's point man on the Certificate of Live Birth controversy. So one of his inside players. And apparently this issue had been vetted with the National Security Council, which is certainly a pretty small and rarefied body of decision makers. And in that piece, which was published in January of 2012, Obama didn't, even though he was president, could have readily dismissed our claims of the existence of the jump room program and his involvement in it. He effectively denied his involvement in the program. And as I was saying, it could have been readily dismissed as either an urban legend or a conspiracy theory. And yet the President of the United States, Barack Obama, denied being in the project and basically belittled us. And so the point I was making after that was, could you see John Fitzgerald Kennedy ridiculing and subjecting to public satire any one of his PT-109 shipmates just for calculated political advantage? No way. Okay, so I already stated after that incident that, look, Barack Obama has surrendered any entitlement he might claim for himself of not just being a great president, but even being a marginally competent president, with the whole way he handled this issue. He didn't have to deny our claims, and yet in the process of denying them, which we think was a tacit admission of the veracity of what we were saying, he ended up literally publicly ridiculing his former comrades. There was an incident on the surface one time when Bernard Mendez and I had gone up ahead of Barry, as we knew him, Barry Sotoro, as we knew him. And this particular jump room device was kind of like a grain elevator. So when you were in it and you arrived, you had to kind of get some help from your comrades, or the first guy out had to really try to clamber up out of the thing and get into the jump room facility. I don't know why they were using it, but there were different jump rooms and different devices. And I actually talked to him to get him to buck up and deal with his fears and extricate himself from that particular jump room. In other words, when we were young men serving on the project, literally 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, okay, I extended my hand into that jump room and pulled Barry up and into that facility, where if we had left him there, we said, Barry, if you don't let us help you get out of this jump room, you could readily be eaten here by a predator, okay? We can't protect all the facilities from predators. So if you don't let us, restore your mobility by helping you climb out of this particular jump room, usually we didn't have to climb out of them, we just walked right out of them, you're going to be in a situation of danger. So I really want you to work with me now and buck up and summon the courage to let us extricate you from your situation. It was my hand and my arm that I extended down into that jump room and saved his life possibly by pulling him out of that situation so he could be mobile and presumably flee from any predator that we encountered, although we didn't encounter one on that particular jump. Now that's an individual who, knowing that, in fact, when Bernard Mendez communicated with Obama about our memories of serving with him in the Mars Jump Room program, through an intermediary, it came back that Obama's position was, I remember the program, I remember Andy vividly, he was quite a character, but my memories are vague and dreamlike, okay? But if he spent any time on it, enough time to discuss it with the National Security Council, to convene a meeting with Tommy Vitor, to deny our claims by planting that article in Wired.com, Obama should have remembered that we were comrades, and yet he mocked us. And that's when we got a real measure of the man. This man is a betrayer of his comrades who he served with, and he's a betrayer of our country. And this is really the first interview where I've been given an opportunity to say that. So I basically agree with your surmise, and it's also symptomatic of the crisis of government in our country, because I don't think the situation will improve very much under Trump or Clinton, in the sense that Trump is a plutocrat to the tune of $4 billion. And I may have said it already, I don't know if I did, but the Clinton Foundation has now accumulated $100 billion. So the Clintons have been portrayed as, the poor Democrat public servants, now that the mainstream media has winnowed down the two apparent remaining candidates in the race to just those two. But in fact, the Clintons are apparently have access to 25 times more money than Trump does. Mm-hmm. But I think both would be bad for the country, but certainly Trump would be more favorable than Clinton. I don't deny you that.
Well, you were talking earlier about skimming off the top from foreign countries and the number of countries that have contributed to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, among them is Nigeria and Haiti, two of the poorest countries on the planet. And here they are. I mean, most of the people live in dirt and they eat bugs, for that matter. And they're giving money to the Clinton Foundation. Are you kidding me? They're
ripping them off. They ripped them off.
Yeah,
they ripped off Haiti after the earthquake. I mean, they're taking money from Saudi Arabia, when Saudi Arabia has been buying our kidnapped children for 70 years. We should be bombing Saudi Arabia into extinction.
Andrew, you said something that I have been saying, because the Clinton body count is now increasing under her running as a candidate. I mean, during the Clinton years, the Clinton scandals, there was an obvious body count, and it seemed to subside. But now that she's running for president, at least 3 people connected with the Clintons have mysteriously died in the last week. And so this body count is going up. So people need to understand it. But what I've been saying, though, on that is I don't believe they're doing that directly, nor do they know who's doing that. But they do know somebody is in the background that is saying, we will take care of your problems. And they are clearing the way. And
make
that's
no
what's
mistake.
happening.
I'm aware of the fact that they're criminals. And I think the information... the information that they've perpetrated fraud by defrauding countries in need like Haiti, and thoroughly corrupt and impoverished countries like not just Haiti, but as you mentioned, Nigeria. I mean, I think that the next president, let's say if it is Mr. Trump, should appoint a special prosecutor and prosecute the Clintons for wire fraud and international aid fraud, business fraud, and the things that they've been involved in. I mean, they utilized one of her brothers to create a dummy corporation, a dummy mining company, so that he could sell the mining rights to Haiti to a bona fide mining company. I'm sorry, that's fraud. That's criminal activity. So your point is well taken. I believe that we're being given a choice between a patriotic plutocrat who cannot constrain his conduct long enough to not make fun of a disabled person in front of one of his own rallies. And then on the other hand, we have these individuals that we don't want to see again, who basically are the Bonnie and Clyde of the international foreign aid industry. I mean, come on, they're criminals. And that goes to why I'm not dropping out of this race. I'm not just running so that people who've supported me morally or financially can vote for me in those states where we're going to get me qualified to be a write-in candidate. I'm running because I want to give the American people the opportunity to avoid electing either one of these 2 candidates president of the United States. But certainly from my reckoning, Hillary Clinton is definitely the more odious of those 2. But I just want to make clear that I'm not stuck in the duality of choosing one over the other. I think they're both unacceptable.
What about the candidates running for the Green Party and the Independent?
Well, if you look at my 100 proposals, you can see why I'm not a Green. I mean, I've been a lifelong Democrat. I'm basically a Kennedy Democrat, and by that I mean a John F. Kennedy Democrat, and not a Ted Kennedy Democrat. For example, I believe that Kennedy and Reagan had successful presidencies, at least stimulated the economies that we enjoyed in the 1960s and the 1980s because they cut taxes. When I look at Jill Stein, who seems to be a decent woman, I know she's a physician, you go to the basic positions of the Greens, and what do you find? You find them wanting to do bright things like, promoting environmental technology, promoting free energy, but then you also see that the Greens want to take our guns away. It's just like Bernie Sanders' candidacy. Look, we're living in a climate in which powerful interests on the left and the right, want to take our money, and at least in the case of the tax and spend Republicans, let me clean this up. It's clear that the Democrats want to take our money and our guns away. Correct?
Correct.
I don't think we have an authentic right in the sense that we have a lot of tax and spend Republicans as well as tax and spend Democrats. So what amazed me about Sanders and what amazes me about the Greens is they don't really get the fact that a lot of conservative people whose votes they would need to become president think that their position on civil rights and the environment and these sort of social democrat issues are fine. But then they have to engage in the extremism of saying, okay, we're going to soak the rich rather than construct a fair tax with which to raise necessary revenues, like the revenues that we need to fund our defense, and they're going to take our guns away. Okay, so really this again is part of the crisis of government. We don't have an authentic set of candidates who reflect that convergence that Nader is now writing about. Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to hold on to my money and my guns, but that doesn't mean I'm opposed to a woman's right to choose abortion so that she has sovereignty over a biological process called pregnancy going on in her body. That doesn't mean I don't believe that we should make the transition to free energy and to wind and solar, and things that a typical centrist or even left-leaning Democrat would agree on.
Andrew,
we don't get the whole package, Daniel, and that's the problem.
Let me ask you, whatever happened to Obama's green dream, his green wet dreams there in the beginning of his tenure, when he, for instance, the $500 million he gave to Solyndra, which ended up that company renegotiated the loan from the government so that if in case they filed bankruptcy, the investors would get paid and the taxpayers would get paid anything left over. Then what do you know, 30 days later, they filed for bankruptcy. And there were several other green initiatives. Whatever happened to those?
They went by the wayside because he has been one of the first most successful practitioners of wholesale corruption in the presidency. My understanding is that he was already worth $1 billion before he ran in 2008, through international money laundering, apparently involving one of the individuals who is described as being his half-brother from Kenya. Mm-hmm. Certainly the individual I knew in the jump room program, if you had told me, he's going to reach we were told that he was going to reach the presidency, but he didn't show the signs of the real moral decrepitude that he embodies. He was somewhat on the left, but there was no indication that he was volubly anti-American in his perspective. So he must have really been successfully hiding that from the rest of us. Mm-hmm. He's certainly hiding his involvement in the CIA's Mars jump room program because he wants to hide his affiliation with the CIA in his youth. I'm not. I was conscripted into that project. It was a CIA project, and I've been upfront about that since I began conferring with William Stillings and Bernard Mendez and now William Whitecrow about our experiences in the project. But no, I'm certainly not an advocate or a supporter of Barack Obama. He's somebody who, as a former comrade, literally betrayed me to the point of mocking the fact that I've talked about my time travel experiences. So at the end of that piece that they planted in Wired.com, they said, well, this idea that he went to Mars is something that a secret chrononaut wants you to know. Well, who was that secret chrononaut? That was yours truly. So what were they doing in that phrase? They were mocking somebody who had helped the United States Defense Technical Community develop time travel and had done so as a little kid. That's how morally decrepit Obama was before he even started abusing his office to sponsor a $5 billion website for some college friends of his wife? Yeah. I mean, come on. This is the wholesale corruption of government. And the question is, if we now elect somebody, Donald Trump, who inherited $400 million from his father and parlayed it into $4 billion despite 6 business bankruptcies, or the Clintons, who are worth 25 times more than Trump is, to the extent that they can engage in drawing that money down from the Clinton Foundation, at least to some extent, how is that going to help us overcome this wholesale corruption of government? They're literally some of the biggest players in the corruption of government. At least the Clintons have been. Mm-hmm. And is Donald Trump suddenly going to become, somebody who will be able to make decisions in the interests of the country, or being a businessman who was that clever, that manipulative, to increase his wealth by an order of magnitude? Is he going to be free of that corruption? I mean, my impression of Mr. Trump is, as I said, he's a remarkable American. He's certainly larger than life. He's certainly more honest than the Clintons. But is he the solution to that kind of problem? I don't think so. I think we've been handed our ruin on a silver platter.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, how are you funding your campaign?
Through donations and my own earnings as a lawyer in solo practice. Look, I've been interviewed by the BBC about my candidacy and my platform, and I only spent $15,000 in personal funds and donations on it. And my 100 proposals have been called by pundits awesome, brilliant, unrivaled, genius in print, and one individual even wrote that they are a life experience to read, and I achieved that measure of notoriety now having done several dozen radio shows as well as the interview on BBC TV, with only $15,000. So I think that's a measure of how desirous the American people are for authentic candidates who will run and govern in their interests. Let me just cite one example, Daniel, because this is critical to our survival as a country. We spent $2 trillion destroying Iraq. For $2 billion, we could retrofit our electrical grid to protect us from either a natural or a human-caused electromagnetic pulse event that, if it happens, could put us back on a 1776 level of energy use. I'm talking about the end to home electricity, business electricity, the end to the internet. We would be reading our available books and newspapers by candlelight if that happens. It's estimated that it could take 5 years to recover, and let us pray that we're not invaded or destroyed by a foreign power during that national catastrophe that would be caused if our electrical grid is shut down by an EMP event. I would laud George Norrie of Coast to Coast AM for calling for that expenditure. So we're not even talking about, as a nation, spending $2 billion to protect ourselves from an electrical catastrophe, a shutdown of our electrical grid, and yet we found the money to spend $2 trillion destroying Iraq. That is utterly the prescription for our decline, possibly our destruction as a country, and that's one of the reasons I'm running.
Well, I'm wondering if the money to fight those endless wars came from the same room that Obama found $400 million to pay off Iran, and maybe it's in the same room. It must be a giant locked box somewhere.
He did it domestically as well. I mean, look at what he did with the TARP funds. Rather than bailing out any of the 20 million American families in foreclosure, he gave the TARP funds to the banks so that they could triple dip. So whether it's a matter of waging war on countries that we shouldn't even be interfering with, or screwing the American people out of their own tax dollars, I agree with your major premise that the Obama years have been a catastrophe for this country, where we elected a former black activist who essentially hates the country president. I mean, look at my own view of it in terms of somebody who served our country for 8 years. I was in the DARPA's Project Pegasus for 4 years. I was in periodically going up to Mars during my college years from 1980 to 84 at UCLA. So I was serving my country periodically for 8 years. And here I found the President of the United States had served with me in the second project, and he was ridiculing me publicly for political advantage. I mean, what could be more abysmal a performance as president as what we've seen from this man? So I agree with your major premise that he's been a disaster, and he's been a disaster because he's not fundamentally loyal to we the people.
Do you believe that his policies is responsible for the formation of ISIS?
His and Hillary Clinton's, yes. I'm no fan of them. Like I said, I'm a Washington Democrat, but I mean, I'm still in the race because I view both of these candidates as unacceptable, and virtually everything that's been said of Hillary, that you would share with me as apparently a Trump partisan that you are, I would agree with. I mean, that's the crisis we're in. You know, look at the good people that we could elect. I mean, I think we would even do better, with a liberal actor like Robert Redford or something. At least somebody who's truthful. At least somebody who can give an interview without lying. I mean, Hillary Clinton is addicted to lying. She is literally an example of the so-called pathological liar. I get that. I get the fact that Obama hates the country and has been screwing us for 8 years. I mean, it's been a disaster. And my point about the threat of an electromagnetic pulse event, if Obama really cared about this country, why didn't he convene a joint session of Congress and say, listen, guys, we just spent $2 trillion destroying Iraq and Afghanistan. Why don't we spend an order of magnitude less saving this country from an EMP event?
Okay. All right, Andrew, let's leave it right there. We're at the top of the hour. We take a 5-minute break right here. We keep you on the line. But before we do, anything you'd like to say, how people can read your proposals, your website address, anything like that, you go right ahead right now.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm at Andy2016.com. And then if you add /donate, you can donate to my campaign. And I'd invite you to read my 100 proposals, my new agenda for a new America, which is said quite sincerely. That's what I'm. It's in that spirit that I'm offering my proposals, and they're at andy2016.com/proposals.
Okay. All right. Just stay on the line, and we're going to turn you down. We'll be right back in 5 minutes with you, Andy.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, you're watching and/or listening to the Edge Television broadcast. On our Newsmaker line tonight is, of course, Andrew D. Basiago. We're talking about his election run for the President of the United States. If you missed any exciting first hour, it'll begin to replay in the main player directly after the show. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. We'll also put it in our TuneIn radio playlist and podcast it as well. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to be... And welcome back to the Edge Television broadcast. My name is Daniel Lott. If you miss any of the exciting first hour of the Edge broadcast, it'll begin to replay in our main player. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And you can watch this program anytime you like. We also podcast the program and put it in our TuneIn radio playlist. Broadcasting the Edge 24 hours a day across any platform, any device. That's our TuneIn radio channel. There's Hail to the Chief. And let's go back to our Newsmaker line and talk to a potential Commander-in-Chief, the Honorable Andrew D. Basiago. Andrew, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Wow. So you're running for the President of the United States, and you're looks like you're self-funding, but you're also taking donations from your website, I think?
Correct.
Okay. And you... let's just say that you are elected, Andrew. What would you like to do the very first day you take the gavel there?
How about ban chemtrail spraying by executive order?
Okay, good.
How about convening a joint session of Congress and urging Congress to allocate $2 billion to protect the electrical grid of our great nation from a natural or man-made EMP event that could put us back on a 1776 level of energy use? How about doing a televised news conference at 7 o'clock on the first Tuesday I'm in office and revealing the fact that for 70 years the United States government has been hiding secret advanced technologies that we could use to literally lead the world in applied science again. So I have many things I would like to do, but those are 3 things I would certainly do in my first 100 days.
Andrew, in the first hour, you referred to the jump room where you said Barry Obama was there. Where is that jump room located?
When I was in the program, I don't know how many there are now, but there were 2. There was the West Coast jump room was in a Hughes Aircraft building, that is to say, a conventional office building, a corporate tower, if you will, that was then owned and operated by Hughes Aircraft, and it was located at 999 North Sepulveda Boulevard in El Segundo, California, immediately south of Los Angeles International Airport. The East Coast jump room was in the CIA facility that is adjacent to the George Washington Bridge in New York City.
When you would make a time travel, and I think you said that you at that point you were in the program, you could only go back 12 hours. Is that right?
No, I was describing the fact that when I started to investigate the facts that my memory was indicating, I realized I was in the initial activities involving actual time travel. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, via Chronovisor, which is an electro-optical device that propagates a hologram of a past or future event, I went as far back as 100 million BC, and utilizing a Stargate device, which is basically an advanced Tesla teleporter, I physically went as far in the future as the year 2045. So no, I was just describing the fact that by 1970, they began adjusting the Tesla teleporter to put us in what we call the past or future upon arrival at our destination.
Is it possible to change time, to change events based on going back in time?
No. When you have the collapse of the wave function in the present events become past events that are embedded in the time-space continuum. Now, that's not to say that you can't go back in time and participate in the original event, but that, after all, is the sine qua non of time travel, is to go back and participate directly in the original event. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when I went back to Gettysburg in 1863 and was photographed there, before I left New Jersey in 1972 to travel back to Pennsylvania in 1863 on a mission, basically, to see Lincoln deliver the Gettysburg Address, the picture of me there that day already existed in the present, because why? From the perspective of November 19th, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I had arrived from the future. Mm-hmm. So you can go back and affect an event, you can fulfill a past event that we have present knowledge of as an historical event, but you can't go back and retrample the flower garden. You can't go back and work a second past, because you're not visiting the second past. You're visiting the original event as it's unfolding.
Let me ask you something. I've got that Gettysburg picture up there, and that the little boy, is that you right there?
That is me, or was me, and in fact that was confirmed as being me by my late father, who served as the point man, basically the chief technical consultant between the world's leading engineering firm, the Ralph M. Parsons Company of Pasadena, and the Central Intelligence Agency on the theory and practice of Tesla teleportation.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you know that was you? Because you remember, as I had the blown up picture that you sent as well here, you're looking off to the left there. Well, that'd be the right, I guess. What are you looking at there?
What happened is I walked into Gettysburg, and some of my clothing had been sheared off flew off during my trip there, including both of my shoes and a sock. So I took off the other sock before walking south from the farmland north of Gettysburg into town. And I didn't have a warm jacket on. It was November 19th, very cold in rural Pennsylvania. My hat had been blown off, and a man by the name of John Lawrence Burns equipped me with a hat, a Union winter parka, and some grossly oversized men's street shoes that you can see in that photograph. They're like size 14's men's shoes, not the size shoes that a 10-year-old would wear, which is the age I was when they sent me to Gettysburg. So I had been over near the dais where Lincoln was soon going to be arriving to deliver the Gettysburg Address, and I was getting so much attention over there, initially from a few ladies dressed in their Sunday best who must have thought I was some carpetbagger because I had a mix of civilian and Union issue clothing on at that point, and then by some soldiers who questioned me at the corner of the dais. I ran into my own father there, who looked younger than he did back at the Time Lab in New Jersey, because he had been sent there from New Jersey about 4 years in real time before I was. Mm-hmm. So I looked 4 years older to him, and he looked 4 years younger to me, and that kind of spooked me. So before Lincoln arrived, I decided to walk about 100 paces away from the dais and look in the opposite direction from where he was going to be disembarking from his horse and walking onto the dais, and to a thunderous applause, which I did hear. It was incredible, the reception that Lincoln got when he dismounted from his horse and stepped atop the dais to deliver his speech. It was just a throng of cheering humanity. It made my spine tingle with excitement. And so I was actually purposefully standing in a relaxed way and looking in the opposite direction, because I basically wanted to be as nonchalant as possible, mm-hmm. because sort of my operational training kicked in, and we had been trained to avoid not just sort of being noticed, but even, being arrested, where we might be put in a prison cell, for example, where it would be difficult to extricate us from a past event. So I was essentially spooked at that point and was trying to sort of ignore what was going on and hope that nobody would notice me before the plasma confinement effect that I was under, which had been used to temporarily embed me in that past event, would wear off. And so I was just sort of waiting there for the effect to wear off. Mm-hmm. And I had given testimony in lectures and on radio broadcasts about the fact that I had looked over to my left and seen the photographer on a small stepladder, and he looked up at me from above his photographer's canopy. and then put his head underneath the canopy again, as I was sort of beginning to tingle as I was returning to the present. We had kind of like a Kundalini sensation with that time travel technology as the plasma confinement effect was wearing off, and we were returned back to the plasma confinement chamber that had been used to embed us in a past event like that. So I had given lectures about how I was fading from view as the photograph was taken, and it was only later that several photo analysts found that you can see my teeth and my right eye socket in that photograph. In other words, the denser part of my body, which shouldn't have been visible by photography of that era, are evident in the photograph, revealing that I indeed was fading from view just as the photograph was being taken. So that's not only the first photograph to show a time traveler from the future in a past event, it is a photograph that proves my claims that I was time traveling during those years.
Did you not have an opportunity to tell Lincoln he was about ready to be assassinated?
Well, he wasn't assassinated there. He was assassinated on April 15th of 2 years later in 1865.
I know, not there. But did it dawn on you to tell him?
In fact, he came down. Oh God, what was the street up from the Wills Hotel? He came down Baltimore Street, and then made a right at what is now the upper part of Ehrenberg Road, which then was Upper Emmitsburg Pike, and then he went south, and then he crossed diagonally across the civilian cemetery that was behind him as he was delivering the Gettysburg Address, and he was delivering the speech across the land that they had just dedicated to create the federal cemetery where the Union dead would be buried. And despite the fact that I had been right up there on Ehrenberg Road, for example, being equipped with the clothing by Mr. Burns, I did not see Lincoln in Gettysburg during that trip. Somehow I just did not see him even on horseback striding in the area out there in the crowd to come over to the right and dismount his horse and then step onto the right side of the stage to give his address. So I just plain missed him. Okay. But I did see him several times during the 6 or 7 times they sent me to his assassination site at Ford's Theater, which I visited via chronovisor repeatedly during the summer of 1971. So I was able to see what Lincoln looked like in 1865. And let me tell you, he was emaciated. He was skin and bones by 1865.
Going back further in time, were you able to see the dinosaurs?
I was sent to about 100 million BC in prehistoric, what is today what we call Arizona. That was my second trip via chronovisor. It was undertaken from the Morristown Performing Arts Center in Morristown, New Jersey, as it was being redeveloped from an historical building that dated back to the 1870s. And I walked along a ridge line in this hot, humid, red earth Arizona environment. It looked very much like the area around Sedona, Arizona does today. And I looked over into a valley and I saw 2 dinosaurs, stegosauruses, chomping on tall grass that was about 20 feet high. So yes, I was able to get a view of dinosaurs as they appeared during that epoch in dinosaur history when there were no carnivores. They were just all vegetarian dinosaurs.
Once you
herbivores,
okay. Yeah. Once you time travel, is there a specific time you're allowed to be in the past or in the future? Is there a device you have that tells you, or do you just disappear back into the present?
It varies. With some of the devices like Tesla teleportation, you need a Tesla teleporter in the past to return to the present, and that's why we couldn't rely on Tesla teleportation to go to a time before the advent of Tesla teleporters, because we would have been stranded in the past. In the case of some of the other time travel devices, the effect just sort of evanesced and we were spontaneously returned to the present. So, for example, plasma confinement works on that basis, where the effect wears off and you stop being embedded in the past, for example, or the future. And also the chronovisors, the hologram would basically start collapsing like a chalk drawing on a Paris sidewalk. And we would then see black body emanations of the people at the chronovisor location or the other children who were returning from the past or future. And then we would find ourselves back on the very stage that we were standing on when they enveloped us with the hologram to embed us and send us to a past or future event. So it varies. Now, how they were actually identifying the specific time, I don't know specifically. I know that they were able to, for example, deliver a nuclear warhead to Red Square in Moscow, or at least theoretically do so. They never did so, thank God, but they could have, not just at that location, but at a specific time. Mm-hmm. So I think working on a three-dimensional matrix with a time signature, they were then able to send us to specific times. So, for example, when they were sending me to Ford's Theater on the night that Lincoln got shot, they were putting me in the muddy street in front of Ford's Theater about a half hour before the play began, repeatedly in the summer of 71. So they were able to identify not just the spatial signature of a past event or location, but the time signature, and put us down with great specificity, not just in a known location, but at a specific time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How did they inject plasma into you?
They didn't. We stood in a lucite chamber that they then permeated. They emitted radioactive plasma into it, and that had the effect of embedding us in a past event. We had sort of a trap door sensation, followed by about 30 seconds of violent wormholing. That's why I lost my shoes and one of my socks and my hat. And then we just were sort of spit out into the future, just like when we were teleporting to Santa Fe from New Jersey.
Is that sort of like the show with Arnold Schwarzenegger where he time travels, and they always appear naked because they evidently some of their clothes don't go with them?
No, we were always dressed with what we were wearing that morning or what we had been outfitted at some of the time labs in New Jersey, where they felt a need to costume us for that particular past location. So, for example, when they sent me to Gettysburg, they dressed me as a Union Bugle boy, but other times I was just wearing, a white T-shirt and blue jeans. Or,
of course, I was referring to the movie Terminator, but it seemed as if that inorganic matter could not be or teleported. But you're saying organic and inorganic matter can be teleported.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, science fiction has really misinformed the public about a number of things. One is that teleportation is the thing depicted on Star Trek, where they disintegrate somebody at embarkation and reintegrate them on a cellular level at destination. Well, that can't be relied on because it kills a living organism. So we were doing the opposite. The Tesla teleporter opens up basically a vortex, a vortal tunnel in the fabric of time-space through which we were passing. Another myth are these myths about the fact that you can't time travel to a time before the development of that technology. That's not an axiomatic technical limit. That's a extrapolation, a mistaken extrapolation from the concept that with some of these devices we couldn't time travel to a time before the advent of that technology without, in a practical sense, being stranded in the past. But it's not a scientific limit. It's not a pure technical limit to time traveling. So, for example, via chronovisor, as I said, I was sent back as far back as 100 million BC, when there were certainly no chronovisors in 100 million BC.
What is this is a question that came in from our Fast Blast. Says, Andrew, what's the difference between your teleportation experiences and Al Abielek's future visit to a city in the year 2137?
They really happened, and I had one phone conversation with Al Bielek, and I studied different claims or different information that people shared with me about him and his account. I'm fairly convinced that Al was a project engineer that underwent some form of mind control to give him some of the critical facts about what Project Pegasus had achieved, like the critical linkage between Tesla teleportation, vortal teleportation, and the Los Alamos physics community. Because after all, the physicists my father and I were interacting with in New Mexico were people like Dr. Harold Agnew, Dr. Edward Teller, some of the principals on Project Manhattan, the project that had built the atomic bomb. But I know that Al was prevaricating in other parts of his time travel testimony because, for example, in his whole account to the Cameron brothers, he basically conflates reincarnation, which is a spiritual, metaphysical experience, and teleportation in a way that utterly confused the public about teleportation. He also claimed, as your as your Fast Blaster stated, that he had visited the 2700s, and I know somebody who visited 2045 that I was told that adults couldn't visit 2045 because of genetic barriers to doing so. So how is it that Al Bielek visited 700 years after that date as an adult? It was not technically feasible during the times that he states he was doing so. So I think that Al can be credited with keeping public discourse about time travel going during the period when the cover-up was still persisting before I began my truth campaign. But and he did share some of the critical facts. Some of his data is spot on. But I'm sorry to say that I believe that he was a disturbed individual who was prevaricating in a large part of his public testimony.
Okay. Peter from Australia, from our live chat, asked this questions to you, Andrew. Can you describe the time you ran into a young version of Art Bell?
Yes, this was actually the event on the Art Bell show that caused Dr. Michael Salla, who had long been a critic of mine and a non-believer of my account, to become a believer of the truth of the situation, which is I am telling the truth about serving in Project Pegasus, and that Project Pegasus achieved time travel in 1970. And that is, I was sent to the year 2013 to view the condition of the U.S. Supreme Court building on November 5th of 1971 from ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey. And every time before we would do an actual time travel from any one of these devices, about 2 or 3 weeks before then, we would do a site visit where we would become acclimated with the location and the technology that was there. In the case of ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey, it was an advanced chronovisor that they had constructed at that location to send children to 2013 to basically investigate the condition of Washington, D.C., a year after what they thought might be the epochal year of 2012, the year in which the Mayan calendar seemed to suggest that civilization or humanity might end. And on that acclimation trip in mid-October of 1971, one of the team leaders, the adult facilitators, as it were, on Project Pegasus, took myself and 3 other children up to ITT Defense Communications, and the 3 other children actually ran into the room where the device was located. And a technician there, basically, without really looking away from what he was working on, basically gave our team leader a piece of his mind, saying, can you tell these children to shut the F up? And she stated that she was going to put him on report for using profanity in front of the children on the project, which was something that was forbidden to do as an adult serving on the project. And she asked him his name, and he said, Arthur William Bell III, but a gal as pretty as you can call me Art. And he kind of flirted with her. She was very attractive. Her name was Elaine Gallagher, and she was actually my principal instructor on the project at my school, which was known as, it's still there, it's called Mountview Road School. And so Elaine was just stunningly pretty, and Art was flirting with her. And I described for Art that incident, the fact that he was working there, what he was wearing, and his whole attitude and how he treated us as kids making noise in his laboratory and what he was working on. And Art acknowledged that he was there during those years wearing, the garb of a technician of that era, complete with the plastic pen holder in his left breast pocket. But he stated that he wasn't working there on a time travel device, namely these chronovisors, but he was there working in a classified position in the communications field, something involving NATO. But if you listen to that Art Bell classic, which is now known as the Quantum Bombshell interview that Art did of me, you can see how he's literally flabbergasted on the air because he was convinced of the truth of my account, which is I did run into a young Art Bell, a 25-year-old Art Bell, when I was a child on the project, but we think it was on another timeline because the Art Bell I encountered was basically playing around with the chronovisor that we would ultimately be sent to 2013 in a couple weeks later, trying to fix the hologram. And they were very sensitive and were always sort of collapsing. Mm-hmm. He was not working in some communications position. So Art was either keeping back that he was a technician on Project Pegasus, but I think he was telling the truth and actually revealing that he was there in some classified capacity, but one that did involve time travel. And I suggested to Art that given the fact that the Art Bell on the timeline I was on was involved in Project Pegasus, that might explain the career interest that Art has had in time travel as the Art Bell that we know and love on this timeline.
Well, I've got to ask, you didn't go back in time and see a younger Daniel Ott, did you?
No, but your fame preceded you, Daniel.
Infamous, I think, might be more.
Yes.
More the
you and I were legends in our own mind on other timelines. Let me assure you.
Well, there you go. As you know, in my Facebook, I refer to myself as President Daniel Ott because I believe that I should in fact be the president, but not maybe switching my vote. You refer to me as a Trump sympathizer, but it's just like I'm looking at two, and I got one who did things and one who says things. I don't know which one will cause more damage in the future. But let me get to some of the other quick questions here for you, Andrew. This one here says, was the Philadelphia experiment an actual project?
Well, it was an operation, but what happened was they basically, after Tesla's death, they had his teleportation technology, and they loaned it. After his paperworks were sent to the National Archives, they were forwarded to Los Alamos because some of the world's most brilliant physicists and electrical engineers were then gathering to build the atomic bomb. So there was an experiment, not with radar invisibility of the Eldridge, the USS Eldridge, but with Tesla teleportation of the USS Martha's Vineyard. And it took place not in Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, but in Long Island Sound. And the individuals on the ship were not Einstein or von Neumann or those who have been suggested were participants in the so-called Philadelphia experiment. They were J. Robert Oppenheimer and Edward Teller. And so after the war, the Office of Naval Intelligence propagated the Philadelphia experiment cover story that we have inherited in books and TV shows and movies. So there was an experiment with Tesla teleportation, but they changed all of the facts to de-link Tesla teleportation and the Los Alamos physics community, because that was essentially the origination of Project Pegasus.
Question from Tom Jones, staying up very late in the UK.
Wow.
During any experiment, did you or any of your jumpers try to bring objects back?
Well, we were advised to basically maintain or uphold what Star Trek called the Prime Directive. In fact, there was a reference made by Jack Pruitt, who was training us in those types of aspects of our service. He made a reference to the Prime Directive on Star Trek that in interacting with the past or future, we should try to disturb as little as possible. But certainly, for example, when I was equipped with new shoes and a new Union winter parka by John Lawrence Burns when I was sent to Gettysburg, I did bring that clothing back. The winter parka held up, but when I appeared again in the plasma confinement chamber in East Hanover, New Jersey, the old shoes just kind of like fell apart right off my feet, almost like an old burlap sack deteriorates, and they just literally fell off my feet, collapsing after being moved 109 years into the future. So that is certainly an example where I brought something back. But generally speaking, we were very well trained by brilliant instructors, and we were had been admonished to not interfere and move things from the past or future to the present for several reasons. One is so that we wouldn't have the effect of doing so, and the other because they were concerned, for example, that we brought artifacts from the future, we would disturb the developmental timeline of things like technology by potentially introducing them into our own present, which from the perspective of the future is the past. Mm-hmm. So we were pretty much trying to have minimal impact situationally in the past and future, but also in terms of keeping hands off of souvenirs and making sure we didn't bring them back to the present.
In Star Trek, several technological devices were introduced to people, such as the flat screen and the cell phone,
The tricorder,
and even the tricorder and various other technologies, which really, I mean, it takes some vision to imagine those up, which actually became reality. But is it possible that somebody time traveled to the future, maybe Gene Roddenberry or somebody he knows, and told him this is what's coming, and they introduced it into the programming?
The possibility that the things that Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso wrote about that he claims were disseminated in the industrial sector of society after we reverse engineered them from the Roswell crash, a similar process of seeding present technology with technology from the future, yes, has been possible, and it has been technically feasible to engage in technology transfer or even the transfer of medical technology from the future to the present since 1970, and this is one of the implications. Now, regarding cell phone technology, immediately prior to his death in 1990, I had conversations with my father about our service together in Project Pegasus, and among the things that I was sort of tapping my dad for were predictions about the future. And he said, I can tell you this, and that is that cell phones, or I think he used the phrase mobile phones, are going to become very popular. And I said, why is that, Dad? He said, well, when we propagate images of the future, let's say the year 2005 in downtown New York City, we see these people walking around using these little walkie-talkies, which was his way as a World War II combat veteran of talking about the cell phone revolution. So in my lectures, I talk about the things that I heard about from roughly around 1969-70 to my dad's death in 1990 in conversations with him or overhearing conversations that he had with individuals in the project when we were on the project together from fall of 1969 to the end of the summer of 72. And I heard about, among other things, 9/11, the identity of future presidents, the emergence of AIDS as an epidemic disease, the emergence of the internet as a global communications network, but also the cell phone revolution was one of the things about the future that Project Pegasus learned about in the early 70s, just as a result of propagating a chronovisor image of, some gathering of humanity in any city in the country after the turn of the century, and they were aware that, people were walking around all the time talking into these little walkie-talkies, so they knew that was going to be a big deal that would emerge in the future as the cell phone revolution.
Have you seen the picture of maybe late 1800s, early 1900s of somebody with a cell phone kind of flying around the internet?
Yeah, I did some research on that because it's constant. The images like that are constantly being placed online, I think, to kind of saturate my Gettysburg picture. At least that's the way that I conceive of it, because some of them are just flat out crazy. Like the kid standing at the dam opening in British Columbia in the 50s, he's dressed like a college kid from the 50s. He's got this tweed sweater and this university letter sweater underneath it that's clearly from our parents' generation, not our own generation of college students. But the one, for example, of the Charlie Chaplin film, the woman's walking 10 feet ahead of the man, and that's from 1928. So I did some research and found that in 1928 there were 4 different brands of handheld hearing aids. And so I think that as an elderly woman, it's much more likely that she was talking into a handheld hearing aid than a cellular phone, because even if somehow a cell phone had been time traveled to 1928 from 2008, there would be no Gwen towers to transmit the signals.
There you go.
So we have to be mindful of the fact that some technologies emerged in the past and they were filmed or photographed, but then they fell by the wayside because superior technologies came along. In the case of handheld hearing aids that are either placed in the ear or embedded, in the cochlea and so forth, and hence obviating the need for handheld hearing aids. So that's what I think we're looking at when we see some of those quote-unquote cell phones are hearing aids. But another line of research that I didn't participate in indicates that Nikola Tesla himself had introduced cellular phones that were in use, at least on a limited basis, and so that For example, that woman in that corporate picture who's walking along with a group of other women that kind of makes a turn, I think in the late 1930s, may in fact have been holding a cell phone.
We've got this question coming in through the Fast Blast here, and it says, Andrew, is there anything you can tell us that we can compare in the future that would make us believe some of the things you're saying? I think what they're saying is whether, do you know anything that will happen that later somebody can say, well, Andrew Basiago said that on Daniel Ott's Edge program, and here it is happening.
Right. That's a fair question, because I like to use a Western idiom. It's a pretty tall drink of water to believe me, but I am telling the truth. And before I answer that question, let me just quickly distinguish the fact that Project Pegasus was obtaining both the general and the specific future. So, for example, they were getting scenes of potential events, but also actual events. And time travel was just emerging when I was a kid on the project, and was really still emerging up to my dad's death in 1990. So I'm sure that some of the things my dad informed me about that would happen in the future, they've already happened. Like, for example, we learned during the jump room training in 1980 that Barack Obama and I were future presidents. He's become president. I'm running for president and will run until I win. But let me just say, the things that I was told would happen, but that I can't ultimately with a dispositive certainty predict, because I wasn't a project insider on the level of my father or somebody like John McCone, who had been a director of Central Intelligence, who was being permitted to read the intelligence reports of future events, include the following. One is there was a prediction that I would ultimately become president. I was never told when or that I would win the presidency, just that I would serve as president. So that could be, for example, after being appointed vice president, or winning the presidency outright, or even under a new government serving as president or vice president and so forth. But there was a prediction that I would reach the White House. There was a prediction that my claim that Mars is an inhabited planet replete with humanoids and animal life forms, I would receive a lot of public hostility and ridicule over that claim, but then that would become the societal consensus when improvements in photo imaging technology would demonstrate that the evidence of life on Mars is right there in some of NASA's images, just like I claimed in my 2008 paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, where I analyzed NASA image 10214, that would happen. Other things, let me think about it, but a lot of the things that were predicted back when I was a child on the project 45 years ago have already taken place, like the Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama presidencies have already happened. The cell phone revolution, the emergence of AIDS, the resignation of President Nixon, the emergence of the internet. There hasn't been a lot more. I certainly did not see any prediction or learn of any prediction of a civil war in the United States, or of an all-out nuclear war with another power like Russia. But we did receive counterinsurgency training to overthrow a tyrannical government in the United States. So when I consider the fact that we seem to be on that path with all of the oppressive legislation in this country since 9/11, I fear for my country, and I'm afraid that we may actually ultimately have to overthrow our government to restore the Bill of Rights and ordered liberty, because sadly that seems, in ways that terrify me, as an individual who loves our country and wants to see our constitutional liberties guaranteed, I'm afraid we may be on that path, and so the counterinsurgency training that we received may someday be needed.
You referred to an overthrow in what sense? In a voting sense, or a
no? We were being taught how to do things like blow up dams and water tanks and other parts of the civic infrastructure to cause the civilian population to rise up to literally, physically, and militarily overthrow a tyrannical government. So in answer to that caller's question, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that interspersed with our time travel training were several days of counterinsurgency training in the event that the American people were confronted with a make-or-break-it sort of need to literally militarily overthrow a tyrannical government. So I won't predict that. It was just training. But my presidency and the ultimate proof, the ultimate public acceptance of the proof that I offered that Mars is inhabited were were revealed to me as ultimate dispositive events, but I only add the caveat, in fairness to myself, that not being an intelligence insider, I don't know whether those predictions were from the general future or the specific future that will dispositively come true in our lifetimes.
Okay. Now, who would you want to submit to be your vice president?
I may announce tonight, because you've asked, I've asked my Chief of Staff, Karen Del Kinnison, of Kentucky, to run as my vice presidential running mate, because as my Chief of Staff on this campaign, Karen has consistently demonstrated a love of country, high character as an individual, high intelligence, and has repeatedly given me phenomenal, morally centered political and strategic advice, and has been the bulwark of my campaign. So she also, I must acknowledge, also pulled a Cheney and came to me and said, "Why don't you select me?" And, I had pledged early in my campaign to select a woman to run with me, not out of tokenism, but because I really believe the Native American proverb that women hold up half the sky. And I wanted to run with a woman not just symbolically and not just to compete with a Hillary, now Tim Kaine ticket, but to really say that, when we have more women in government, I think we're going to have more humane government. I don't necessarily see women as an antidote to war, because if we look at the first 4 female heads of state, namely Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, who else? Golda Meir, and Cory Aquino. Only one of them, Corazon Aquino, avoided going to war during her term as the chief executive of her respective country. The other 3 actually brought their countries into warfare, namely with Egypt, Pakistan, and Argentina, respectively. But I do believe in the fundamental truth of the fact that we are being harmed as a collective culture, as a civilization, by a male bias in government. We've eliminated it in the law and medicine and in college teaching and in every other area of society, the astronaut corps. I like to say that when Sally Ride was being touted as the first woman to serve aboard the space shuttle, my colleague Regina Dugan was on Mars as a participant in the Mars Jump Room program, or at least whatever off-planet location they were in fact sending us to. So I learned early on in my life, and also let me add that there weren't just Montauk boys. There was an equal mix of girls and boys that served in the development of time travel for our country in DARPA's Project Pegasus. So I grew up serving and competing with women. I think women have just as much to offer that men do in government, and I think we have to begin electing women more commonly to office. And so that was really at the heart of my very early promise to select a woman to run with me, and as fate would have it, it is going to be my Chief of Staff, Karen Kinnison of Kentucky.
Wow! So this is breaking news. You're announcing that tonight on the Edge broadcast.
Because it was asked. We've been preparing Karen's press release, but she's just a wonderful person who has really given me the best possible colleagueship and guidance as a presidential candidate and as a human being. I think she would make a truly great vice president and president of this country in the event that, for some reason, I left the presidency.
The question came in when you're talking about jumping to Mars. Did you jump in? Was there an atmosphere when you went up there?
There is an atmosphere on Mars, and in fact, that's one of the proofs that I served there and was there. Because at a time when it was heretical to suggest that Mars had blue skies, I was describing the sky on Mars as being baby blue. And you can go back on Mars Anomaly Research Society on Facebook and find those statements, and then find the data that was published by Paul Goodwin in the United Kingdom, and then Andrew R. Steck in the United States, and now by other leading Mars anomalists, that the sky on Mars is blue. There's in fact a blue luminescent halo around Mars when it's photographed by satellite from space. Mars has a blue atmosphere, not the kind of dingy red one that NASA shows it to be when it washes the red filter to make Mars look like it has a red atmosphere. Now, where is that oxygen coming from? Oxygen is a clear gas that refracts blue just as it does on planet Earth, which gives Mars its beautiful pale blue atmosphere. I was told by Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA that the oxygen on Mars, it's insufficient oxygen to sustain human life for very long because, for example, even after several hours on the surface of Mars, when I was just walking or standing around without running or exerting myself in any great measure, I would get screaming pains in my thigh and calf muscles from hypoxia, which is limited oxygen. So there's a limited oxygen supply that enables us to work unassisted for several hours on Mars. And that, Courtney Hunt told me, is coming from the lithosphere, the layer of rock on Mars where oxygen is seeping from the rocks and replenishing that atmosphere.
Andrew, is Karen aware and convinced of the type of things you've described on this program tonight?
Oh, yeah. She's a longtime supporter and colleague of mine, and believes wholeheartedly in what I've alleged publicly, because she knows me personally and knows I've been telling the truth. She initially did not believe that Mars was inhabited. In fact, published a work of fiction of futurism in which she stated that she didn't believe that Mars was inhabited, at least in terms of the fictional premise of that book. But as a result of reading my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, my landmark paper published in 2008, she now knows that Mars is inhabited and actually switched over from supporting Hillary to support Andy 2016. So I'm very grateful for that. But now she's my running mate because I pledged to select a woman, and I've decided on this remarkably strong and moral colleague to run with me.
Could you describe when you and Barack Obama would jump? Did you both show up at the jump center? Do you go into a device together, or do you go separately? Describe how that would work.
Yeah, well, I only several times in the 40 or more times I went up there was I jumping with him. He was in the program, and that the magnitude of his service doesn't expand as a result of the fact that he later was elected president, no more than it will when I'm elected president. But I usually was jumping by myself or with somebody else besides Barry Soetoro, as we knew him. But when any of us would jump, including President Obama, we would basically stand in one of the elevators, either at the CIA facility in New York near the George Washington Bridge or at that Hughes building in El Segundo. We would enter the elevator. After about 5 minutes, it would essentially morph from a box-like structure into a cylinder, and we were being twisted with it. And we would see this clockwise twisting on the far wall that would persist for about 10 minutes and then begin untwisting in a counterclockwise direction, so that about 20 minutes into the jump, we were back in a box-like structure. The far wall would open up, and we were usually in the sub-basement level of a jump room facility on Mars. So the Mars jump room program kind of diverged from most of the time travel devices that I had contact with 10 years earlier on Project Pegasus, in the sense that it had a receiving device. For example, when we would jump through the Tesla device at the old Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey, when we were teleporting to Santa Fe, we were literally popping into view in the open air of the New Mexico State Capitol complex there in Santa Fe without any receiving mechanism in Santa Fe. In fact, I developed some first-person eyewitness accounts of individuals who had seen us or heard about us popping into view during my fact-finding, and I'm going to discuss those in my book. So usually when you're time traveling, you just need to jump through one device or stand in one device. But the Mars jump room program diverged in the sense that it had a receiving mechanism, which was another elevator-like column that accepted the jump room device. However that was moving through time space, I don't know, because I'm not a physicist or engineer. I'm an attorney. But yes, we would then arrive in an elevator-like column in a facility on Mars that would receive the jump room itself.
You said that Mars is populated. Who or what is it populated by?
It's very sparsely populated. It looks basically and is basically one big desert-like planet, with the exception of a green area about the size of Texas that was featured in the September 1955 edition of the National Geographic. If your listeners want to visit and read up on the green region of Mars at their local university library, pull that copy of the National Geographic. Mm-hmm. But most of it looks like anything from the desert around Sedona, Arizona, with very rust-red rocks and soil, all the way to more like the high desert of California, where you have small foliage, small cactuses, and so forth. But it is a desert planet. Now, it is inhabited by 5 humanoid primates, basically those that are the descendants of Earthlings on Mars prior to the solar system catastrophe around 11,500 years ago, that basically caused a falling out between Earth and Mars, a lack of contact between the humanoids on both planets. There's also a more diminutive, more elfin, sort of pointy-eared humanoid who are the original inhabitants of Mars. There are very gray ET-like Martians. There's very diminutive, sort of comic-looking humanoids. And then there's a Sasquatch species on Mars that's smaller than our Sasquatch, but still about 6 foot tall, hairy bipedal humanoids. So those are the 6 type of humanoids. Then there are about 30 major land animals that consist of animals that exist on Earth, like horses and cows, animals that once existed on Earth that are extinct, like the aquatic reptile known as the plesiosaur, which didn't survive the KT extinction on Earth, right, survived as a terrestrial reptile on Mars. And then there are mixes of animals and humanoids such as don't exist on Earth. Like during my second jump, not by myself, which I went up by myself on the first jump and was greeted by 3 humans on the surface, three Earthlings on the surface. But on the my second jump, which was with Courtney Hunt, we encountered a man who was basically half human, and his lower extremities were sort of grub-like, guarding a property of one of our settlers on the Martian surface. So there are also hybrid life forms on Mars. You can look at my landmark paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, to see, for example, what we call the Scorpion Man. There are creatures on Mars that have the upper extremities of a human being from Earth and the lower anatomy of a scorpion on Earth. So they're also hybrids, almost as if there was hybridization following a nuclear war on Mars or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's a mixed bag, but mm-hmm, your listeners should know that Mars is inhabited not just with humanoids, but descendants of Earthlings who traveled to Mars during the first civilization on Earth, the one that built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, that was destroyed about 11,500 years ago on Earth, and also animals that exist here and that once existed here on Earth, or that have never existed on Earth. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the fascinating world that awaits our children, which is the whole world of the exoarchaeology and the exobiology of other planets in our solar system that are inhabited.
Andrew, in the first hour, you said that referring to Barry Soetoro being in the JUMP program, publicly attempted to humiliate you or distance himself or ridicule you.
Well, he ridiculed me.
Okay.
Yeah.
What exactly did he say in public?
Well, he said that they claimed, first of all, something that was factually untrue, that he was not in the Mars Jump Room program, and the only connection he's ever had to Mars is watching Marvin the Martians on Saturday morning cartoons, presumably with his 2 lovely daughters, and that and that the notion that
lovely?
He had been on Mars was something that's something that a secret chrononaut wanted you to know. So he basically mocked our claims, even though what I wanted to say in the first hour was, look, he's president. He could have readily dismissed our claims as emanating from either an urban legend or a conspiracy theory. Instead, it looks like the National Security Council actually met to vet the issue of whether he should say anything or not, because the individual who planted that story in Wired magazine online was the spokesman for the National Security Council, Tommy Vitor, or Vitor. So I don't know that the National Security Council met, but their spokesman planted the story. So one can, it certainly creates what we call in the law a rebuttable presumption that in fact the NSC determined that this was a serious enough allegation about the president to knock down. The problem is we have now 4 witnesses who place him on Mars. Myself, William Stillings, Bernard Mendez, and now William Whitecrow. 4 participant witnesses who served in the Mars Jump Room program who say, yeah, Andy's telling the truth. I certainly can speak for myself, that Barry Soetoro, now known as Barack Obama, was an individual who served in the project. Now, let me just say that from the perspective as somebody who wants to be believed because I'm telling the truth and who has now developed a reputation in the truth movement for having an impact on people's understanding of the truth and being believed, we debated whether or not we should come forward with this information because, look, stating that this particular president, not only the president, but this particular president, somebody who's the first African American to serve as president, somebody from Hawaii of all states, and being the kind of sort of iconoclastic or idiosyncratic kind of president that we've had, it certainly invited ridicule and disbelief by saying, yeah, and guess what? Not only did we jump to Mars, and some of us jumped there a lot in the early 80s, but the current sitting president was one of the jumpers. I mean, that subjected us to more disbelief than belief, but we decided as a collective to reveal that fact because we knew that if we didn't, when the jump story is affirmed, if we didn't reveal that Obama was one of the jumpers, people would allege that we were engaged in a public release of limited information on behalf of the CIA, which was the sponsor of the program. So essentially, the truth itself compelled us to reveal the truth, which was the truth, that Obama served in the project. So what? I mean, look at the remarkable people they were inviting in the project. I would like to think I was one of those remarkable people in the sense that they had also predicted my presidency and my truth campaign. But Regina Dugan would go on to become the first woman to direct DARPA. Another one of the jumpers that we were trained with was William Cameron McCool, who became a space shuttle pilot and tragically lost his life during the the Columbia disaster in 2003. Okay, so they were selecting remarkable American young people to send to Mars, and guess what? One of them was Barack Obama.
All right. Well, Andrew Basiago, we're getting near the end of the broadcast now. For your presidential run, there's, of course, the Democrat Party, the Republican, Libertarian, Green, and so on. What is the actual name of your party?
I'm not running with party support. In fact, one of my 100 proposals is to literally have a plebiscite. As president, I would sponsor an election, a special election. It might not survive scrutiny, given the presentment clause of the Constitution that, legislation has to be enacted via presentment to both branches of Congress. But I believe that we should get rid of the parties. They are an unconstitutional aberration, and the party system is largely responsible for the failure in government that we now have. Because people they're not governing based on from the heart like I want to, nor even fully from their head, as Jefferson would pose it, in the sense that they're calculating their political advantage as members of a partisan system. And that is not just damaging us. If you look at the failure of Congress to deal with the threat posed by an electromagnetic pulse event and allocate a Peasley $2 billion, our country is now at threat of destruction as a result of the partisan system. So I want to get rid of the parties and embrace not direct democracy as is practiced in Switzerland, where you would literally everybody would be voting on every last bill on the internet. But I would favor a softer model, that what's called soft direct democracy, where the individuals are representing themselves and their own conscience and the interests of their constituents, not their parties. And so I'm not running with any party support. I'm running, as is my constitutional right, as an individual under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, because I'm a natural-born American citizen who has reached the age of 35, who has been in the country for 14 years. And I want to ignite a political movement in this country to get rid of the parties. Because Ralph Nader is right when he says, look, a convergence is forming in our country where people of all different political stripes and backgrounds and party allegiances in the past are recognizing that there's now really, in practical terms, only two parties, the insiders and the rest of us, the outsiders.
Oh, that's well said. I've certainly come to that conclusion. But just one real quick on the EMP defense, what world stage actor is most likely to exact that vengeance upon us, the EMP pulse?
Either a well-organized, well-funded terrorist group like ISIS, which ISIS has been since we left all that oil in Iraq and all that military equipment, like 2,300 Humvees, as Mr. Trump has alerted us to, or a country that we would go to war with. Like, for example, if we wanted to begin defending our own children by going to war with Saudi Arabia. I don't believe that Russia poses the threat that some allege, because I believe that Russia wants to continue to evolve economically and socially and be at peace with us. So I think the greatest chance of a man-made EMP attack on the country, which could be achieved by blowing a thermonuclear device up somewhere above Topeka, Kansas, up in the stratosphere, would be probably a well-funded terrorist group like ISIS.
Andrew, describe what you see as a Andrew D. Bashago voter. What does that person look like? What do they want?
I think it's somebody who cares about the truth, recognizes that, as Ross Perot underscored, we need to enter a reform era in this country. We certainly had one under Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt came into the New York legislature as a 24-year-old as a reform candidate. And that we are an incredible country. We are a great country. We don't need to become one, as Mr. Trump would aver. We've done remarkable things. Look at what we've done. We've landed on the moon. We've developed awesome weapons to preserve the peace. We've developed things like that just saved my left leg from amputation called antibiotics. We're a great people. We're an incredibly creative people. So what my administration would be an administration that would always tell the truth to the American people, put a set of reforms before the Congress that are necessary to save our country as a civilization, and that would use the presidency in the way that John F. Kennedy and Ronald W. Reagan used it, as a catalyst. I would become the drum major, leading the parade to spark the creativity of the American people themselves. I would cut taxes to do that. My one tax is a fair tax that would fund the necessary functions of government through a tiny tax on bank withdrawals, which is my innovative tax proposal. So that's what my administration would look like. I would lead on the technical front with a call to going back and rediscovering the Tesla teleportation technology that was reduced to practice by the very secret defense project that I served in. And so that's what voters for, that's what an Andrew D. Bashago voter looks like, somebody who's looking for truth, reform, and innovation.
Okay. Well, Andrew D. Bashago, appreciate you coming on the Edge television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
Certainly, Daniel. As I said when I accepted your invitation, it's been a high honor and a distinct privilege to be interviewed by a man as great as you, somebody who actually deserves the appellation President Daniel Ott.
Right on. Okay. All right, Andrew, I'll tell you what, we need to get you back on before the election, and we'll certainly get in contact with you on that. Thank you so much for being on the broadcast tonight.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, everybody. That was Andrew D. Bashago talking about his run for the President of the United States in 2016. Be sure to stop by his website. We have a link directly on the Edge's website. This program will begin to replay in case those of you missed the first hour. We'll also put it up on our YouTube channel, podcast it, and put it into our TuneIn Radio playlist. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions and staying with us with the program tonight. We're going to be back next week. Daniel Ott for the Edge. Bye-bye.